Hey, what's up, guys? Guardian here, coming to you guys with a new deck profile, and this time we're going to be taking a look into the set 3 decks for Overdress. So, first up, we're going to be taking a look at Bastion with the introduction of the new Grade 3 Lagrele, which has actually turned the deck to be quite thought-provoking now. Obviously, to say that the Bastion deck was much to be desired before in terms of interesting gameplay. Lagrele actually gives a good spin to the deck now, and it's a lot more resource heavy in terms of using your resources well, and also the deck has a lot more lines of play now in terms of setting up your field and managing your resources, like I said. So let's get into the deck, and I'll show you guys what I'm playing. So to start with the ride line, this really hasn't changed much, but we still have the typical base starter. We have the Fort Grade 1, the Rux Grade 2, and the Bastion Grade 3. No reason to change this. I know that Blast the Dark is an option for a ride line, but it does cost a Counterblast, and Counterblast is a lot more important in this deck than you realize. The Fort will give us the possibility of getting a free plus from the top of the deck, and then the Rux will draw us a card when we ride the Bastion on top of him. So yeah, very simple ride line, pretty much sticking with the norm there. Next, we have the Grade 3s, so we have the 3 additional copies of Bastion for the Persona Ride. Persona Ride is even more important in this deck because it will enable the ability of Resource, which is the unit on the playmat. Basically, he will get the boost ability when you Persona Ride, so as soon as you get to that Grade 4, the turn 4, you'll actually be able to pull off some really good aggro turns, and normally at that point you're looking to end the game usually, so definitely need to play the 3 extra copies of Bastion for the Persona Ride, not just because Persona Riding is good, but it's also a piece of the deck that we need to do to end the game. Alright, so next we have the next Grade 3, which is going to be the new one from set 3, which is 4 copies of Lagrele. So Lagrele is a really interesting unit, and it's actually made Bastion a little bit more interesting now to play. So basically, to put this card into a nutshell, and to simplify it, basically you're going to be counterblasting 2 and resting any of your rear guards when he attacks, and there are 3 important numbers to remember when it comes to resting the number of rear guards that you're going to be doing, which is 4, 2, and 0. So when you're resting 4 rear guards, basically you will not have to discard any cards for the downside of Lagrele's ability, because he's going to be giving you a Twin Drive, and also he'll get 5k, but obviously the Twin Drive is more important there. The 5k is just nice for numbers, but an extra Twin Drive that turn on top of Bastion's Vanguard Twin Drive, pretty good overall, and also it increases your chances of activating Bastion's skill as well for that restand. So resting 4 isn't actually too bad, since what you could do is that you could rest your other 4 rears, and then from those 4 drive checks, potentially stand the front row rear guard in the other column, which could be something like an Alden, for example. So that's pretty cool. You could also rest 2 rear guards, and the downside there was that you'd have to discard 3 cards from your hand, which means you'll be taking the 2 cards that you got away from the Lagrele away from yourself, but also one of the cards that you generated through Bastion's Twin Drive will be taken away as well. So technically you're only getting a +1 that turn instead of the normal +2 that you get from the normal Twin Drive from your Vanguard, but in exchange obviously you're getting that Twin Drive from the Lagrele and the potential pushing power. And then obviously you have the risky play, which is resting 0 of your rear guards, which in that case you will have to discard a total of 5 cards from your hand, which is a very big minus, let's say. Now, this is something that you're not necessarily going to do all the time, but if you're in a position where you need to push for the game, since you don't think you might have another turn, that's the scenario where that could crop up. So, Lagrele, very interesting card, very interestingly designed, and I do think it's made Bastion a little bit more fun to play, especially for me personally. So yeah, 4 copies of him, very, very cool card. Alright. Next, we have another card which got improved from Lagrele, which is 4 copies of Resource. So I've already mentioned his name once or twice, but his skill is if you were Persona Rod this turn, he gets the boost ability, which is really cool. But also, when you're whilst he's in the back or rear guard, once per turn, when your other unit stands by a card effect, stand this unit. So the cool thing with this is that when you're resting units for the Lagrele, keeping in the mind that your Resource can actually stand back up when you stand one of your rears up, means that you can actually pay for the skill again for the Lagrele if you want to do even more of an aggro turn. So as long as you have the resources to cover this, since you will have to counterblast 4 technically, 2 for the first attack and then 2 for the second, you could actually pay for the cost again and rest those 2 rear guards, which is at least a minimalistic amount to do. You'll have to discard 3 at the end of the battle. But the fact that the resource just synergizes super well with the Lagrele allows you to do some really explosive turns. And don't forget, he will get the boost ability on your Persona Ride turns, which means you can do some really good columns and really powerful numbers to help facilitate somewhat of an endgame plan when it comes to killing your opponent, basically. So yeah, this card massively improved from Lagrele. This card came out from set 2, so yeah, really cool addition to be playing this in conjunction with the Lagrele. Now, an old but goodie that we've stuck with since set 1, which is of course the Alden. Alden is still good, and I think he always will be in Keta, just because he's he gives you a +2. He helps you see pieces, which is more important. So you're not just doing him because he's a good card, but you're doing that as well as the fact that he draws you cards to see pieces to set the field up. So he actually has a bit more of a purpose in this deck outside of just being, goodcard.com, you know what I mean? So yeah. And also the times where you do, when you don't see the Lagrele, you can just fall back on the old playstyle of the deck with the Alden, and just using him to do your pressure turns, since he does gain the power every time he attacks. So yeah, Alden is still a good pressure piece and just consistency piece overall. And yeah, we're still playing him in the deck as a 4-Rob, obviously. So 4 copies of him. And then we have the next grade 3, which is going to be more of a resource tool for the deck, which is the 4 copy of Refluke. So he will obviously give 10k power to a rear guard, so we can do even more pressure turns with the Lagrele or the Alden, depending on what we want to do. But he also gives us that soul charging capability that need that soul blast, which we'll see some of those in a second. So yeah, the 4 copies of Refluke. And then the last card, well, the last grade 3 of the deck, I should say, which is an order card, which is the 3 copies of the Chosen Knights. So this card is kind of like the flex slot of the deck. You can play some other stuff if you don't particularly like playing this. I know that for me, personally, I've had occasions where when I'm riding on top of the fort, the grade 1 and the ride line, this has came up once or twice where I reveal this and then it just goes to the drop zone and I don't get a plus, which it sucks, but I mean, it's a low chance. You're not playing, too many orders in the deck. 3 is a pretty small number in regard, and it's the really early stages of the game, so it shouldn't happen a whole bunch, but it does suck when that happens. So I wouldn't blame you if you want to replace this, say, for like another grade 3 piece outside of this. But what I do like about this order is that it gives you an alternative line of play depending on the resources you have available. So sometimes you may only have the 1 counterblast and 1 soul blast to work with, but that can still give you a good push turn, since the card itself is still good. You're getting that draw, a slight power buff, and you're also an extra drive check as well, which is really nice. So yeah, I decided to go for the build with the Chosen Knight order, so that's the one I decided to do. All right, so for grade 1s, we actually have some grade 1 utility in the deck, which one is going to be the 4 copies of Fashita. So Fashita, I used this in Hexrob, I believe, initially, but it's actually become a lot better in Bastion now, because what you can do is that, what this card does is that when you reveal a trigger from your drive check, you can pay the cost of Soul Blasting 2 to countercharge 1. And the reason that's important is that during the battle phase, if you have, say, 3 Counterblast available, you can spend 2 of it to do Lagrele or Alden plays, and then if you get 1 trigger from the drive check, you could use this to get your countercharge. And then that will give you 2 Counterblasts again to then line up with a potential another Lagrele turn, which is really cool. And that's sort of where the aggro side of this deck can come in, and where it can just get crazy, because performing like 6 drive checks in a turn, which is going to be costly at the end of it, but it's also going to be really pressurizing. So yeah, that could just end the game flat out. So yeah, the utility that the Fashita brings down to the deck is really cool. Also, it does give you the potential of doing some early game aggro if your opponent is pushing against you, because it does give you a grade 1 to put down if you have, say, like an abundance of these in your hand, since that has come up a couple of times. But yeah, it is really nice to have. And I usually put this behind the Vanguard usually because Bastion is going to be 15 on his own. So with this, if I'm not going to be resting it for Lagrele skill and I'm going to be resting, say, ref resources in my other rearguard columns, I could also just use this as a booster to make Bastion 23, which is a good magic number. So yeah, so 4 copies of her, really, really cool. And then the last grade one of the deck is going to be the 4 copies of the PG, of course, which, yeah, pretty standard for most decks, just to help protect yourself. And yeah, usually with this deck, you're going to have a small hand size at some point, just because you will get dwindled down at some point from discarding sometimes of Lagrele. So actually enabling the, you know, the 1 card PG with this is actually pretty cool. So yeah, pick these up if you can, but 4 copies of those. All right, and then last but not least, we have the triggers. So we have the most important one being the over trigger. Still sticking with the Keta one, of course. I know we have the start deck one that we could use, but I think the drive check value of this is just still too good to pass up. It's a little bit funny now, actually, because since Lagrele actually gets it passively from his own ability, well, I guess not passively, you have to pay the cost, but you could say if you get this and then able to restand Lagrele, that could save you 2 counterblast maybe, so that you don't have to spend for his skill again to get another twin drive, since you'll have it from the overtrigger, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the value of the overtrigger is too good to pass up, so we're still playing that one. Alright, and then for the other triggers, we are going with the 8 copies of the critical triggers, 4 copies of the old one, and then 4 copies of the new one. The new one doesn't really come up that often in terms of its skill, but it is there just in case, so that is that. And then we have 3 copies of the draw trigger, since drawing cards is definitely a lot more important now. I have seen some builds where they do go for front triggers, but I still think draw is the better way to go in this build of the deck with the Lagrele. So yeah, and also it's nice to be able to actually play these with the foil, because I haven't actually played this foil card yet, so it's nice to be able to play this in this version of the deck. And then the last card, last but not least, of course, is the 4 heal triggers, which look very, very pretty. But yeah, I'm going to play the 4 heals as per usual. But yeah, that's basically it for the deck. So the deck overall, like I said, it's definitely a lot more interesting now. Lagrele does add a lot more of a dimension to the deck to make it interesting. But yeah, it's definitely evolving, and this deck is going to see another stage of evolution when we get to the set 4 with the Bastion Prime. But until that set comes out in English, this is basically what I've been playing with for Bastion and what I've been rolling with. So I'd love to know what you guys think about the deck in the comments below. This is usually the most basic version of the deck from what I've seen, but it's also the one that I've enjoyed the most playing with and piloting. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. Stay tuned for a Hex Robe update when I play with that deck for a little bit, and I will catch you guys in the next video. So like always, this is Guardian205, signing out.